Now, here's some fun trivia for the next time you're just sitting around the dinner table. Did you know that it takes a chameleon about a half a minute to change its color? That's right, a half a minute. Now, let's talk us some octopus. An octopus can change its color in 50 to 200 milliseconds. That's right, milliseconds, not minutes. As Dr. Jennifer Mather tells us, the octopus really is the real chameleon. Not only can they vary their colors, they can change the patterns of the colors, and they can even change their textures. But here's something even more crazier about that. Do you know that they actually do this without color vision? Don't worry, we're going to get into this in the episode. Now, here's a couple other things. Did you know that an octopus has this really big brain power? They've got this thing called complex cognition. Basically, what that means is different systems working independently with different cognitive tests and also with a brain-body ratio that's larger than most vertebrates land and sea. Here's another really, really cool fact. I love this one. If we could turn an octopus into a human and then have it take a math IQ test, it would score above 140. You know what that means? Genius level. And by the way, and since we're talking about octopus, did you happen to see the documentary My Octopus Teacher? It was a great one, and I want you to hold on to this thought for a second. University of Lethbridge professor Dr. Jennifer Mathers, she joins me, and you know what's cool? Dr. Mathers was a scientific advisor on that film. You know, I tell you what, it was such a privilege to talk to her. We talk about so many cephalopod topics. Did you catch that fancy word? I just can't wait for you to hear them. So she was so informative and gracious, and because of this, and because of her, this is a great episode. We are supported by PrepVet, providing stem cell therapy for pets.
As a pet lover, did you know your pet can benefit from the incredible healing power of stem cell therapy? Prep Therapy offers a groundbreaking solution taken right from your pet's own blood. Say goodbye to joint pain, arthritis, kidney and liver conditions, and more. They'll experience faster recovery, increased vitality, and extended quality of life without the need for surgery or harmful drugs. Put the wag back in their tail and discover Prep Therapy today at prepvet.com. Save 10% with promo code FurRealPodcast, covered by most pet insurance.
For real, 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 for real. Got a bunch of furry friends and I love them all the same. I'm an animal lover, veterinarian is the name. Let's share some pet stories from heartwarming to strange. Losses and gains, from wacky to insane. For real. You're now tuned in to For Real with your host, Mark Kyle.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the For Real Podcast. Today, I have a guest that I've really couldn't wait to talk to her. And there's a story to this down the road that I'll probably bring up later, but she is one of the most well-known researchers of octopus. She's up in Canada, and I'm going to apologize right off the bat because she does a lot more than that, and I just feel like we're all really lucky to have her. Please welcome Dr. Jennifer Mather. Jennifer, thanks so much for being on, and I can't wait to talk to you.
Thanks, Mark.
So why don't we start off and talk a little bit about, I'm going to use the term, and they're big words for me, and I always try to cephalopods, but let's talk about your background. Obviously, you've been doing this for a long time. How'd you get there? How'd you end up with cephalopods and doing everything you're doing? And of course, what you're doing now with school, when we've talked about that at the university. But let's talk about all that, because you've sent me some great papers. I've read it. I understood most of it, but I had to look up some of the words. So, Jennifer, here I'll pass it over to you.
Sure. Well, people have asked me that, and it's reasonably simple. I grew up in Victoria on the west coast of Canada. And when I was a kid, I was fascinated with the ocean. But when you're a kid, you don't go jumping in the ocean. So I was what I would describe as messing around in the intertidal zone. So the water goes out and there's all sorts of stuff left in tide pools, underneath rocks and stuff like that. And I was really fascinated with it. And when I was 8, 10, 12 maybe, I started collecting shells. That was easy. And cataloging the shells and figuring out what was there and where it lived and all that kind of stuff. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to study sea animals when I grow up. And mollusks, that's what shells are from. So I thought, okay, I'll study mollusks. Now, I have to admit that I thought, and do think, that I'm interested in the whole animal. Yeah, there's all sorts of fascinating stuff about RNA and DNA and membranes and genetics, but I wanted to know what the animal was doing. And so when I went to university, I thought, okay, I'm going to go into biology. I'm going to study the whole animal, so I'll go study ecology. And it wasn't very long before I discovered that actually ecology wasn't interested in the animal either. Ecology is interested in the species, and it's interested in the habitat, and it's interested in the ecotone, and the animal itself gets lost. Besides, it turned out, to be perfectly honest, that to do ecology, you don't just have to have biology, you have to have chemistry, you have to have biophysics, you have to have geology, you have to have, in my case, oceanography. It's really, really complicated to have a good background for ecology. Oh, yeah, and you have to love statistics. So I actually got to fourth year before I took an animal behavior course, and I went, that's it.
Hmm.
And then I moved, so to speak, to the cephalopods because they're the smartest mollusks. So they have the most interesting stuff in their behavior.
Everything I've read and some of the research, and we're going to dig into it, it's pretty amazing. I'm sure several of the listeners out there probably saw My Octopus Teacher, that documentary, which was just fascinating to me and sad at the end, but I mean, pretty wild. What did you think of that, by the way?
I was their scientific advisor.
Oh, well, there we go. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, Netflix had money, right?
Right.
Craig got in touch with me and said that he wanted to make sure that the film and what he was saying was authentic. So Netflix paid for me to fly to South Africa for 10 days, which I'm perfectly happy to do.
Who's going to complain about that?
And if you look way the heck down at the bottom, way down at the bottom of the credits, I'm there.
Well, I tell you what, the cinematography in itself alone was amazing.
Oh, he's fabulous.
Yeah, it was. I mean, what a story! And the thing is, and of course, where we're going to get into this. You grow up and you know a little bit about things, but when you like that documentary, and of course, the research I've done is just how smart they really are. It's crazy.
That's right. But I don't think it's crazy. I think it's great.
No, it's crazy that I didn't know. It's more like what it really is. It's crazy. Well, I didn't know that.
And it's fascinating to realize, by the way, since you're in the media business, that the appreciation that people have for octopuses and by extension marine animals is hugely increased by the popularity of that film.
Oh, absolutely. It's funny is because, there's a coffee shop fairly close to my house that generally in the mornings I get up early and I do some kind of physical activity and I always stop there. So I have there's a group of people like most coffee houses that are there all the time, and people are always trying to get updates on what I'm doing on the podcast. And when I mentioned that I was going to be talking to you, I can't begin to tell you how many people were so excited to hear about it. One, and two is they all brought up the documentary. So that whatever they did on that thing, they did a great job in getting that information out.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that Craig is a fabulous photographer.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
On the other hand, if you think about it from the point of view of the media, if you make a documentary too factual, everybody goes to sleep.
Oh, I got you. So it was entertaining as well.
So it was his involvement with the animal that really got people's attention.
Yeah, they were paying about their relationship versus the octopus itself.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. I got that. So let's dig into, I knew what a cuttlefish was, but I had to really look it up to see what it was. But let's dig into octopus, cuttlefish, and I keep always thinking about 10,000 leagues below the sea because the name of his boat was a Nautilus. So the Nautilus, and can you also, because again, I've done some of the research, and again, a little bit is dangerous, but explain to everybody what a mollusk is, because I knew what it was, but I didn't really know. I thought I knew what it was. Let's just put it that way.
Okay. Well, the cephalopods are mollusks, which means their relatives are clams and snails. Okay?
Right.
Way back in the history of the planet, nautiluses in particular absolutely dominated the seas. Now these were shelled cephalopods. They lived in shells but they're reasonably smart. Not as smart as our guys, but reasonably smart. But we think that what happened is the bony fish evolved and they outcompeted the nautiloids. And the result is that most of them went extinct, and this one branch developed that did what I would describe as leave the shell behind. It's a silly thing to say because, of course, no animal picks up the shell, drops it off, and walks out. But what happened is they evolved to be shell free. But you're not going to survive in the ocean, or for that matter, anywhere, if you don't have some kind of protection. If you don't have spines, if you don't have poison, if you don't have shells, you don't have some way to repel everybody else, then you better have something. And in their case, it was smarts.
Oh, it's incredible.
They're great.
I mean, let's talk about. I mean, we're going to bounce all over the place because I'm so curious about everything. And of course, I read your articles or your papers you send. Let's talk about their camouflage ability. Well, first of all, let's talk about the size of their brain. I found that was pretty interesting too. Compared to mammals, it's pretty crazy. Not crazy. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and we kind of take it for granted that the bigger the brain, the smarter the animal.
Right.
This only doesn't work when we start looking at the insects. And we're just beginning to understand that. You'll have to get somebody to come talk to you who raises bees and start talking.
Oh, absolutely.
But except for miniaturization, we take it for granted the bigger the brain, the smarter the animal. Mostly that's true. And their brain is about the size of a rat's brain or a pigeon's brain.
Okay.
But 3/5 of their nervous system is not in the brain, it's out in the arms.
Right.
So that means that if you take the whole nervous system into consideration, they have a way bigger brain body ratio than even many mammals. So we can expect, one way to look at it would be to say we can expect it to be smart because they got a big brain. But you would really have to say, okay, they evolved to have a big brain and to be smart, and it kind of went along together.
What I liked about some of the stuff that I read, and again, I'm sure I'm probably correct me where I missed it a little bit. What I really liked is that so they've got their brain, they've got their arms, and they've got their camouflage. So you've got these three systems, and at some level they all kind of work together, and at some level they work independently. And I don't know if the word because I read about cognition and intellect, and they're two different things. And so the theory is that sometimes the arms with the suckers and the tentacles and stuff, they're actually thinking on their own sometimes, even though the brain's not telling them what to do. How does that work?
Okay, the way I try to describe it to people, and there's a lot of people that are debating about this, okay?
Okay.
You probably have to go back to structure.
Okay.
So the arms are what we call a muscular hydrostat. They have no bones. So what that means is they can, in fact, move any darn way they like. And they do that by stiffening some of the muscles to act as temporary bones, while the other muscles articulate against them. And when they do something else, they stiffen another bunch of muscles and use the other bunch of muscles to move. So it's very, very complicated. So I think for that reason, the animals, so to speak, had to evolve to leave a lot of the lower level processing out in the arms.
Okay.
Because the brain couldn't have enough processing power to process all the details of how to move a muscular hydrostat.
So when they're using their tentacles to do their thing, and that would be more, is it cognition because they're figuring out how to do that, or is that intelligence, or is it a combination of both?
But you see, that's when you run into really interesting problems. Problems of figuring out what they're doing and problems of figuring out how to define what they're doing.
Right.
Okay. First of all, if you chop off an octopus's arm, It has a good deal of independent movement. Suckers can still pick up stuff. The arm can still extend. It doesn't know why it's doing it, but it has quite a bit of independent behavior. But nobody has ever proved that an arm actually learns, though I have the suspicion they haven't looked in enough detail at simple things like habituation. So the brain's the center. And the way that I think of it is to think about what a democracy works like.
We're trying to figure that out here in the US right now.
Yeah, I know. So you have someone in the center who's ultimately in charge, but they give a lot of the lower level figuring out what to do to subsidiaries.
Okay.
And I have to admit, you have a really funny system in the US that doesn't work very well, which is why the Canadian system.
Not lately, that's for sure.
Okay, so you have a leader, and then you'll have a parliament, and then you'll have, for us, it's central government and provincial government. For you, it's federal government and state government. And then there's local government. So there's a lot of local control.
Right.
And that's what's going on with the octopus's arms.
Okay. So that makes sense to me. One of the things that you had, I think it was in one of your papers, was, and I didn't know this, that they're smart enough to know how to open a jar to get food or a reward, I guess.
Right.
That's crazy. So they can go to a jar and twist the cap off?
On the other hand, and here's what happened. I don't think I sent you that particular paper. Another researcher who was actually in Italy, he gave octopuses jars and they opened them. But the first time they opened them, it might take 30 minutes. And the next time it made 5. And the next time it would take 20. So they weren't learning what they were doing. They were fumbling around and figuring it out over and over. Okay. Now, totally accidentally, my colleague Roland Anderson, who worked at the Seattle Aquarium, he was doing for demonstration, giving jars to octopuses and having the octopus open it up and actually it was a piece of fish of some kind. Okay. But he wasn't doing a careful experiment. So what he ended up doing is opening the jar, putting in the piece of sardine, closing the jar, putting it out for the octopus. And he did this over and over, and he noticed something funny. He noticed that they were learning. They were taking less and less time, so it went from 30 minutes all the way down to 2 minutes. And so we talked about that, and I said, I know what's going on. You've given them chemical cues.
How did they get the chemical cues? I saw something in there. I don't know how that works. What does that mean?
He didn't clean his hands.
Oh.
Okay. And sardine smells.
Right.
So he was smearing sardine on the outside. Now, if you think of what the octopus does, okay, the octopus sees the jar, picks it up with its arms, brings it in underneath its arms, and then opens it up. So when it's actually trying to open it up, it can't see it anymore.
Oh, it's by tactile touch.
No, chemical.
Chemical, because it wants to eat.
Yeah. So what we did is we did a formal experiment, carefully cleaning hands and all that stuff. And it turned out that if we just gave the octopus the crab in a jar, it couldn't remember to open it. But if we gave it the crab with the jar and smeared mucus from whatever on the outside of the jar, then it opened it. And the real cool thing about it was that if we did the visual plus chemical, right, and it opened it. So if we went back and gave it the visual afterwards, without the chemical, it remembered. And it did it okay with the visual only.
So the chemical trained them to have memory to learn it because they were assuming it was there already because they've already learned it. If it was once they had the chemical cue.
Yeah.
Huh. That's cool.
Smart animal.
That's amazing.
But I mean, we do that kind of thing without even thinking about it.
Oh yeah. Well, when I smell bacon, I'm always hungry.
No, I was thinking about imagine that you go to McDonald's for a hamburger, right?
Right.
And you learn the route. And then you see the McDonald's sign and you know that's where the hamburger is, right?
Right.
After a while, you just turn right, turn left, and go find the hamburger. You've learned the route.
Yeah, you're not thinking about it anymore.
Yep, exactly.
That's crazy. So the other thing is, we'll get into camouflage here in a second, is how they're able to take their bodies to fit around whatever. Oh, let's talk about the L-shaped thing too. They learned how to get an object through an L-shaped, I guess, corridor or whatever you want to call it. Let's talk a little bit about that too.
Well, there's two things about that. For one thing, one of my colleagues did a study where it was like a Y maze, except it was just one arm, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the animal could learn to stick the arm in and make a decision about whether to go left or right to get food. And it could do that by a visual cue, but it could also do that by remembering left or right. And it could also do it if you made a rough surface on the bottom of the tube so they knew that they should go to the rough side and not the smooth side.
Yeah, so they could feel it.
So they can do it, but we do the same kind of thing, actually.
Sure we do.
Lots of different cues.
Right.
And in the world, normally, we use them together.
Yeah.
And actually, what's fun about that is one of my colleagues, I haven't met her actually, I don't know if I call her a colleague, but anyway, she said something different. Now, I have to explain if we have information by touch and information by sight, we use vision, right?
Right. Because we see faster than we touch. It's easier to see than touch, I guess.
Yeah. But if she gave octopuses chemical cues and visual cues, if they were together, they were better. But if she made it so that chemical cues said one thing and visual cues said another thing, they went by the chemical ones.
Yeah. Their stomach. It's all about the stomach.
So, but they see they're the opposite to us because we have good eyes and we use them for
Right.
everything, 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 and they have good eyes, but they've also got all these chemical sensings in their suckers in particular. There's something like hundreds of receptors in each sucker.
So I guess as I'm thinking about this, are the chemical cues usually associated with feeding?
The first answer is that a lot of the times that's what people test.
Right.
The second answer is no, but we don't have an awful lot of information about it. I strongly suspect that, okay, when it comes time to mate, which is at the end of the lifespan, by the way,
Mm-hmm.
males find females. Males go wandering around the landscape looking for females.
Right.
I strongly suspect they use visual chemical cues, but nobody's proven it.
Well, that would make sense.
See, it's often the case that I have to say, I think they do this, but the reason I think they do this is that somebody's tested cuttlefish and they do this, okay?
Right.
So cuttlefish and octopuses, cuttlefish, and squid all shoot out this ink at predators.
Right. And to camouflage, to hide themselves, basically, right?
Well, but it turns out that it's a whole bunch of things.
Okay.
Somebody looking at squid found A, it clogs up the gills of the predator and confuses the predator. It allows the animal to hide from a predator. And the other thing is, and there's a little teeny squid called Euprimna that I saw this with. They can shoot out a blob of ink, and then they turn pale and leave, and the predator sitting there grabbing at the ink. So it's like a fake animal.
Yeah. Well, it's a duplicate. It's a holographic image of themselves, and they go on. They take off. That's kind of funny. It's cool.
Yeah. The other thing is, it turns out that it's an alarm cue for other squid.
Oh, so they know that too. Well, that's similar to like when you talk about dolphins or something, or even bees, don't they? Like when they're like they form a swarm to one to find flowers, but also where something may be bad too, don't they? Like with smoke or something like that.
Well, bees are actually very, very sensitive to chemical cues.
Right.
So they've got chemicals. I'll tell you this one. I don't have to just talk about octopuses. There's a particular chemical, I think it's ants. There's a particular chemical they give off when they die.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So that causes other ants to take them out of the home and off to the garbage heap.
Oh.
So what a researcher did who had found out what the chemical was is he sprayed it on some live ants. And the other ants said, "You're dead." And they dragged them out of the ant's nest to the garbage heap, kicking and screaming, and they come back again.
Let me go, let me go. I'm not dead. It's like the Monty Python movie. I'm not dead yet.
I liked that.
Hey, so one thing for the listeners out here, and again, I should have known this. So when you're talking about, let me pronounce right, cephalopods, they're considered invertebrates. Now, what I didn't even think about is insects are considered the same thing.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about it, it's a class of people that don't have a backbone, basically. I mean, sure, animals or insects have exoskeletons and things like that,
Yeah.
but I didn't put them in that category because I never thought past that. Again, this comes back to what we were talking before recording is about awareness, is paying attention.
Now I'm going to blow your mind.
Oh, please.
97 or 98% of the animals on the planet are invertebrates.
90, well, yeah, well, I guess if I'm starting to think about, are you saying animals, not insects?
Insects are animals.
Oh, they're considered animals. Okay, there we go. I learned something today.
Of course they are. Okay. Sorry, basic biology.
Yeah, help me.
Okay. A plant makes its own food. An animal has to get food from someplace else.
Okay, there we go.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's not quite that simple because the fungi break down remains of other food, but it's pretty simple. Plant makes its own stuff, animal doesn't.
Okay.
So of course, insects, mollusks, echinoderms, crustaceans, they're all animals.
Yeah,
And they're all invertebrates.
that's so great. Well, it's like I told you again before we were recording is one of the reasons I like doing the podcast. I'm learning all this stuff that I should have known, but I'm learning. I never thought about it. It's logical. It makes sense all the way, but I never really thought about it that way. But it makes sense to me. I know what an animal is.
Okay, so I get to pinion your country, okay? Because in the United States, you can do anything to an invertebrate that you would do to a dissected out piece of tissue. There are no animal rights for invertebrates in the United States.
Well, there's not a lot of animal rights across the board. Matter of fact, there's a attorney that I'm talking to. There's an organization called animalrights.org. And this is, I mean, without getting too much detail, they're going back and trying to create legislation worldwide for, the elephant that's being mistreated in a zoo to you go through a divorce and you have a dog. And who does the dog go to? Because the dog doesn't get to make their decision. However, the way animals are treated now, they're treated more like beings and should have more rights. So there's actually a lot of legal legislation that's going on right now about rights here in the U.S. and that worldwide now too. So maybe they will have more rights down the road.
Well, the answer is they probably will because there are people working at it. But the European Union has had cephalopods protected the same as vertebrates for about 15 years.
Really?
In Canada, cephalopods have been protected in research since something like the early 1990s. I was part of that. Okay, so the answer is not, no, everybody doesn't protect animals. There's absolutely no doubt we don't protect animals as well as we should.
Of course.
But the answer is you guys are behind everybody else. Well, you're not behind the USSR, you're not behind China, you're not behind Japan, but you're behind a whole lot of us. And it's interesting because when the UK left the European Union,
Right.
there was an animal rights group in the UK called Crustacean Compassion. And they had been arguing for rights for crustaceans when they were in the European Union and they lost. So when they left the European Union, somebody got galvanized and said, okay, now we can get protection for crustaceans. So what they did is they asked Jonathan Birch, who's at the London School of Economics, to do a study to figure out whether which invertebrates might have sentience and therefore should be protected. And a year ago Christmas, he came out with his report. He said cephalopods and decapod crustaceans, which is shrimp and lobsters and crabs, basically, showed signs of sentience and should be protected. And interestingly enough, the government had asked for this study. They'd commissioned this study, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they reported the results of the study in November, and in something like February or March, the House of Commons came up for a vote and said, okay, they said they should be protected, so they will be protected. So not only are cephalopods legally protected in the UK, but so are decapod crustaceans.
So how does that work? I mean, obviously they're part of the food for a lot of human animals. So you're eating shrimp, you're eating lobster, or you're eating, squid or whatever at a sushi restaurant. How does that work?
Have you heard of something called the Five Freedoms?
Probably not. So tell me. And I'm sure there's a lot of us out there that if I haven't, and I'm assuming more people know than me.
So it's okay. An animal in captivity, whether it's for research, whether it's for food, whether it's as a pet, and I don't remember exactly who suggested this, but this is worldwide. They should have, and I'm going to get some of these wrong, freedom from hunger, freedom from thirst, freedom from fear, freedom from discomfort and pain, and freedom to express normal behaviors.
Okay.
This is worldwide and animal wide. This is what we should do for any animal.
But we obviously have not.
Well, yeah. And the other thing is, by the way, that clearly if you're going to kill an animal, you should kill it humanely.
Oh, of course.
Well, of course isn't necessarily what happens.
Well, I agree. No, I know. Obviously, you and I are on the same page.
But the interesting part of it comes because I've just been talking to the class about this. What do we say when we talk about freedom to express normal behavior? What do we mean?
Well, define normal. That's the problem.
Well, on the other hand, we do know, I mean, I'm an ethologist, we know the normal behavior of a lot of animals. But think of cage chickens being raised for their eggs. They spend their whole life in a small rack almost that slants a little bit so that when they lay eggs, the eggs roll down and they get collected. They can't move around. They can't do the normal behavior of digging in the dirt, and they can't do the normal behavior of laying eggs and sitting on them. They can't do anything. They're just sitting there. And often they chop off the tip of their beak so that they will get the next door one.
Well, there's a guy in Austin, actually, his name Michael Hare, who has I forget the name of his brand. His chickens are all free range, and they're literally he only will they have I forget how many square meters per chicken is allowed because he felt it was inhumane, and at the natural food grocery stores that we have over here, they're a huge brand now. They're a lot more expensive, but they're certainly better tasting
Yep.
and there we're going with normal behavior. That's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, it turns out that in Canada, at any rate, there's cage, free run, which are kept indoors but can move around,
Mm-hmm.
and free range, which could go outdoors. And by the way, because this is so funny, we call them free range eggs.
Of course.
Have you ever seen an egg going anywhere?
Well, I've seen eggheads do this, but not eggs.
Well, I've seen caught them and then they've gone someplace, but that's not the idea. So the idea of free range eggs always piques my sense of humor.
Yeah, well, typical marketing is what it is. So let's talk a little bit about camouflage and octopus because I don't want to. I know you've got a schedule going, and there's so much. What I hate about doing that, what I love about doing the podcast, and what I hate about doing the podcast, there's never enough time to cover everything that I want to ask about. And I mean, when you read about how, and I've what is it? I know the word. I wrote it down so I would remember how to pronounce it, but it's chroma chromatophore. Is that it?
Yeah, chromatophores.
Chromatophore. So with some of their capabilities, and let's dig into this because most people won't know this. I mean,
Sure.
you know, there's so many things. I'm just going to let you talk and listen because I'm just fascinated by everything that they can do.
Okay, well, there were in some paper, what I said is octopuses are the real chameleons.
Right, exactly. I love that one too. Matter of fact, I even wrote down something. You'll be impressed that I actually read it, but the fact that they can change in 50 to 200 milliseconds compared to a chameleon is, to me, is just awesome.
Right. And the reason they can do that is just exactly the structure of the chromatophores, because they're little elastic sacs all over, peppered all over in the skin, okay? And they are pulled outward by muscles, at which point you see the color. And the muscles are all controlled directly by nerves from the brain. So that means they can do it in no time at all, and it means they can do it in any pattern they like.
In the blink of an eye, and that's controlled by RNA too, right? Not DNA, RNA.
No, that's different.
Okay, okay.
It's the same thing as you moving a finger.
Right,
The brain sends nerves to the muscles, and the muscles are moved when the nerves fire.
right. Okay.
So because you've got the nerves and the muscles, it's instantaneous. Now, another thing I might have said in that paper, or I might have said in something else, is that octopuses are pointillists.
Which means
So I don't know a lot about art, but I like art. And I like the Impressionists. And my daughter once said to me, Mom, of course you like Impressionists. You teach perception.
right. My daughter's an artist, by the way.
Yeah, okay, so she'd know this.
Yeah.
So a pointillist, it was a group of the Impressionists, and they made paintings simply by taking little tiny dots of color, dot by dot by dot by dot by dot.
Right.
And so if you looked at under a microscope, you would see that it was dots. But if you get back about a couple of feet,
Right. They blew together, which is the same thing as the television.
right, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's what the octopus uses with chromatophores. Now it's got yellow, red, and black chromatophores. Okay, so it can combine these things, can combine the colors. It can make one or all of them. And because it has such nice spatial control, it could make, I mean, it could probably, think about it, it could change an area the size of a square millimeter easily, maybe even less. So it's got fine, fine, detailed control. But it also turns out that if the muscles relax, then the dot goes back and you can't see anything, right? And underneath they have iridophores and leucophores. And the leucophores simply reflect the light that's coming in.
Right. I read that. That was just in the ambient light. I know it's crazy.
Yeah. So they give you back the color you got in the first place. And the iridophores actually give you blue, green, and they seem to be fairly specialized.
Well, the thing that I read too, and it's funny because like I was telling you, I've got an episode that's coming out with manatees that they're colorblind.
Yep.
Manatees are too.
Interesting, but manatees don't have any reason to need color.
Well, they see well when they're looking for things specifically like food or they eat plants and that they need the blues and the greens. They don't need it's red that they can't see. And so and what actually the guy that I was talking to, he's one of the top scientists and manatees over the world. So the deeper you get when you're diving, and you would probably know this, you don't see red the farther you get down. So they don't need it.
Yeah, if you think about it, every animal has a perceptual system that fits where it lives.
Right.
Okay. So if you think so, octopuses can show color but can't see color. Now, all you have to do is be a diver, and you know that the water filters out all the red end of the spectrum within about 10 feet.
Right.
So color turns out not to be terribly useful in the water. However, they can discriminate the plane of polarization of light.
Okay, explain that to me.
Yeah.
Now you're over my head.
See, light is funny because it's energy, right?
Right.
And it actually arrives at our eyes as photons.
Right.
But somehow or other, in the process of getting to us, it vibrates spatially. And don't try to understand it because I don't understand it either.
Well, don't worry. I'm already in a different zone, but I'm listening.
But it can vibrate horizontally, it can vibrate vertically.
Okay. Up, down, side by side, up and down. Gotcha.
Yeah, yeah. And the octopus can tell.
The way it's vibrating.
Yeah. So can bees. We know a lot more about what good it is for bees because bees look up at the sky and they don't see blue. They see vibration directions.
Wow, that's cool.
And they use that for navigating.
That's cool. Well, there's a theory out there, and they're still trying to figure it out, is that dolphins, when they're trying to navigate, and I don't know if it's the sound that the echo that they get back, there's some theory out there, they haven't proved it, that they're actually, the echo they're getting back potentially could be a 3D, in what they're reading with that echo is a 3D description of whatever's ahead of them.
Yes.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy.
And if you want to find out about that, go interview somebody who works with bats.
Oh, yeah. Well, where I am at, I'm in Austin, and we have the largest Mexican brown bat population in the world here. They live underneath there's a bridge here. They live underneath the bridge and the creases from the bridge.
But the octopus is reasonably easy to imagine. Try to imagine what it must be like to construct a three-dimensional world out of echoes.
I know. It's wild.
Because that's what the bats do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, that's how they find food even.
Oh, yeah. So we go back to the octopuses. They can't see color because they don't have the pigment in the eye. On the other hand, and it turns out that they get quite a bit of information about where things are by the plane of polarization of light, by where they are. Okay? And it turns out that if you're in murky water, then the color's all filtered out and the polarization is received better. So it's easier to see where you are in the water if you can do plane of polarization of light than it is if you can do color.
So when they're reading the vibrations, whatever that vibration is telling him, versus us seeing color, they're reading the color by the vibration.
Well, I like to think of it this way. We're reading color, they're reading direction.
Okay. That works. That works for me. Well, one of the things you said I think it was in your article, that they actually can, if they see like a checkerboard, they can change now again, I may have read this incorrectly. They can actually make themselves look like a checkerboard.
Yeah, they're not 100%, but sorta. The other thing they can do, which is equally fun, is that they have little muscles in the skin and they can change the texture of the skin.
Yeah. I wanted to get to that. But one more thing that I thought was cool too is, so they're in the water, and if a cloud is going across the sky, they'll actually they'll have that shadow, I guess, of the cloud across their body too.
Well, but they don't do that because of the cloud in the sky.
They do it because they're not getting the colors filtered to them correctly.
No. Here is where I found it being used, okay?
Okay.
Octopus comes up to a crab, wants to grab the crab, grabs, misses. The crab freezes because this is what crabs do.
Hmm.
And the octopus knows it's out there someplace, but if it would move, it could find it. So it makes a shadow on the skin and runs it down towards the crab to scare the crab.
Ah, that's cool.
And cuttlefish do that too.
That's cool. I love that.
Oh, that's marvelous. I love it.
Well, now let's get to texture because that's all part of this too. They can change their skin, can change their texture
That's right.
just so to blend into their environment, basically.
Yep.
I mean, and that's across the board, a bunch of different things. The other thing too, you can tell I get excited about this kind of stuff. The other thing too is the deal where when they've got a big predator to make themselves look bigger, and that may be the cuttlefish, it may be both. I don't know.
Now, octopuses do this too. They can spread all their arms wide and bring the skin down and look absolutely huge.
And also make their eyes look bigger or farther apart or something.
The cuttlefish can make eyes a mantle on their back, so to speak.
And that intimidates the prey that's coming after them, basically, because they think it's a bigger thing. I love this.
Well, I do too.
Obviously.
Interestingly enough, the octopuses don't usually use vision when they're trying to communicate with other octopuses. They're solitary
Yeah.
and they don't seem to care what they look like. But the squid and the cuttlefish are quite different. They have courtship patterns and agonistic fighting patterns.
I find it interesting because they're similar, and I find it interesting. It's the same somewhat with the primates. When you talk about chimpanzees versus gorillas versus orangutans are more solitary than the other ones. They're not as social as some of the other ones.
That's right.
So it's interesting how when they're similar, that doesn't mean they're the same at all.
But the interesting thing about it is bonobos. Do you know anything about them?
Yeah, a little bit.
Well, they're sort of like chimps. They are just as closely related to us as chimps.
Right. Within a percent. Yeah.
And the interesting thing about bonobos is they solve all their problems by sex.
They're definitely closer to humans.
No, no. No, instead of fighting, they'll just sort of go rub genitals. They don't fight.
Actually, the least aggressive one of all the great apes are the orangutans. They're the least aggressive compared to because the chimpanzees will go fight each other. The orangutans really don't like to fight. They may act like charging and break a couple branches. They don't typically fight each other at all. They're very
They're solitary.
yeah.
Well, but I mean, if you're solitary, you don't have the chance to fight, and you don't necessarily have things to fight with.
Right. Well, that's true.
So because they're solitary, they're not usually fighting. But the bonobos don't fight, and they are group living. As I said, they solve everything with sex.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, and they're just as closely related to us as chimpanzees, so we went in the wrong direction.
Yeah. Well. Wait. Well. Don't get me started. No, don't get me started on that part because I'm right there with you on that one.
So I'll tell you about the squid and the cuttlefish because this is kind of interesting.
Okay.
The males have a display that they can make to females that is, gee, I'm interested in sex, how about you? And they have a display they can make to males that says, get away, get lost, this is mine. And they can do one on one side and one on the other.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's cool.
Well, I happen to think this is very interesting. I cannot communicate one thing on one side of me and another thing on the other side of me. I would really like to have that ability. Can you imagine?
No, I totally can imagine, especially when you've got kids. The one kid on one side, the other one, you can say two different things. You.
You could encourage one and quell another at the same
Well,
time.
and you're teaching kids, even though they're in the universities. It's the same thing. They're still kids.
Well, I disagree.
Okay.
I treat my students like adults. Generally, I have third and fourth year students, but that's fair. But if I treat them like adults, mostly they act like adults.
Well, they're supposed to.
I said mostly.
Yeah, well, maybe the kids today are better than when I was in college or university. I don't know.
But you see, it depends on the person. So you've seen that outline of that course that I'm doing.
Right.
And the class, there are no exams. I don't believe in exams. The class is a discussion class.
Which is the way the world used to learn a long time ago. Socrates.
Yeah, but you got to remember that when the Greeks were talking about democracy, right,
Hmm.
they meant only the men and only the people who were actually citizens of Athens. So their democracy included a very small portion of people.
A select group.
Yes. And since I wasn't in that group, I have
Yeah, that's funny.
some contention with the idea of who matters. Gotcha. We didn't really talk very much about octopuses, did we?
Well, no, we did a lot. Matter of fact, that's what I was going to say. Since we're starting to run out of time, what else would you like everybody to know? Obviously, their rights and stuff like that, that would be interesting for anybody that's got a curious mind, similar to mine and yours, obviously, that you'd like to put out there for everybody.
Well, the first thing I'd suggest is go snorkel
Yeah.
and just hang around in the water and watch. If you go snorkel and you go smashing across the landscape, everything hides. If you stop and you float there for 5 or 10 minutes, things come out and you go, oh, I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
That is a wonderful way to learn about the life in the ocean.
And there, you don't realize how much life is down there. I didn't tell you this, but I grew up in California
Right.
and I lived in an area called Palos Verdes, and all along there they had huge tide pools. So as a kid, we would go down and there'd be starfish and abalone and urchins and crabs and all those kind of things. So I've had a love of the ocean since I was a little kid. As a matter of fact, I always tell people now that I'm inland, kind of like you are right now, I always want to get my saltwater fix.
Yeah, I'm very, very jealous of Craig Foster.
Yeah.
He's the producer of My Octopus Teacher. Do you know why?
Why?
He lives up the hill from the water.
Yeah. Oh, is that where the house that was there? Was that his house?
Yes.
The one in the film? Oh, wow. That house was beautiful.
Yeah. And he goes snorkeling every day.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I would say, and this is philosophical rather than behavioral, give the animals respect.
Yeah.
I like the way the North American Indians feel that we are part of a huge kaleidoscope of all animals and all plants on the planet, and each has their place, and each has their own knowledge, and each has their own system, and we ought to respect all of them.
And if we did, we'd probably understand things better as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so for people that want to do research or maybe even send you a message, can you, it's social media, website, whatever, what would be the best thing that you would recommend that we can put out there for all the listeners that want to know more than what we were able to cover?
Oh dear. You don't give me time to think about these things.
I'll tell you what, while you're doing that, one is I know I mentioned, I don't know if I think I mentioned to you about, I do this silly thing where I do a silly joke at the end of every episode. Did I tell you about that? I can't remember if I did or didn't. I have one for you, actually.
Tell me.
And this is specifically for you. So you have to answer it. Let's see if you can get it. So there's a story behind this, and I'll do this offline when we're telling it because I brought it up before. But I've been doing this silly dad joke forever, and I know most of the people that listen get really cringe. But I have my silly dad joke that has to do with octopus. So here you go. What do you call two octopuses that look alike?
I don't know. You tell me.
Identical.
Oh,
I know it's terrible, but it's just me. I know it's awful, and I know everybody who listens cringes. And I always tell everybody, so everybody's out there listening, if you've got a better one, there's a better one out there. Please, please send me an email at mkyle@forrealpodcast.com. Send me your joke, and if you want to be on air to tell it with one of your kids or whoever, I'll do that because obviously I need some help, and I definitely need that. But or if you have a good guest that you think would be good content that you would like to hear or whatever, again, send it to me, mkyle@forrealpodcast.com. So back to you, Jennifer. Is there anything you want to tell people on social media or anything on contact that worst case scenario, I can put it on the description of the podcast or the podcast or whatever you want to do.
I think probably if you're curious, read. You can read popular stuff, and you can read research papers, and you can listen to you could listen to videos, you could watch films. There's lots of ways to find out about wild animals.
Great.
And as a matter of fact, go and find a nice tide pool. It's lovely if you can.
Yeah, tide pools are amazing, and they're all over the place. Wherever you travel, if you're by the ocean, you can always find a tide pool generally, and you'll be shocked what you'll see in there. And again, like you said, just wait. Even if you're not snorkeling, if you sit in a tide pool, you'll start hearing sounds of whatever, crabs walking around or something. It's pretty crazy.
But you also have to sit and wait.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about being a little bit of patience. Well, so Jennifer, first off, thanks so much for being on. I could have talked to you for 3 or 4 hours. I know you have other things to do, but I really, really appreciate you taking the time. I know you and I have been communicating back and forth via email, but I really appreciate it. Thanks so much for being on.
No problem.
Yeah, it was absolutely fun for me. And for everybody else that's just listening out there, please pass the word. These stories out there, they're precious, and you're going to learn something that you probably didn't know, and we want other people to do it too. So if you pass the word about it, follow, spread the word. I'd really appreciate it. And to everybody else out there, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. For real.
For real, 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 for real.
We're supported by Let's Walk, that's here to love your animals like our own.
Austin, Houston, and Denver. Let's Walk is here to love your animals like our own. From daily walks, play, in-house sleepovers, and more. Go to work, out on the town, or take a vacation knowing your pets are in the best hands. This woman-owned small business does it all. Check us out on Instagram at Let's Walk Austin, Houston, and Denver.
That concludes this episode of For Real with your host, Mark Kyle. For previous and future episodes of For Real, listen via all major podcast streaming sites.